further ado, we're going to get started. So today's session, like I mentioned, designing playbooks that power your customer journey. So we're going to cover quite a bit of things. Like I said, we're going to start off with like, what is a playbook, the anatomy of a playbook, talk about how to break it down. We're going to talk about how to get your teams enabled on it, how to operationalize it. This will probably be the only bit or piece where I will talk a little bit about client success, because obviously that's what I'm using to power our playbooks. But listen, platform agnostic, you can use any technology, customer success platform to power your playbooks. But I'll talk about how I'm doing it in our solution today. So without further ado, let's jump right in and get started. I do apologize if I'm a little scratchy, a lot of talking over the holiday break. All right, so where would we start if it wasn't at the beginning? So, I know that there's a lot of folks who talk about playbooks, and not everyone is super familiar with it, right? I think people might have different ideas of what a playbook might be, what it makes up of. So let me give you the definition that I use when talking to my customers, talking to my team about. A playbook is a series of actions that are meant to be executed to help a customer achieve a goal or objective in a scalable manner. Right? So think about this. It is different tasks, activities, right? Different things, actions that you want your team to take in order to achieve a particular goal with the customer that they're working with. And so we're going to unpack this and what this means, but this is in its simplest form. And I like to use the definition because I think there are so many people who have their own ideas of what a playbook might be. I know that there are certain platforms that use the term playbook. And so you might be thinking about it as a product and not a strategy. And so we're going to talk about it and break it down into a bit more. So if you were unsure of what a playbook was, hopefully this helps give some context. So what I want to start with are the elements of a playbook, because I think it's important. I've seen a lot of folks create a list of tasks and activities, which is great, but then they'll roll it out to their team and it has very little context, and it's missing things that make it substantial or really make it valuable to the folks who are using it in their day-to-day. So when I build any playbook, or when I'm working with any of our customers who are building their playbooks, I like to start with point one here, which is you have to have a very clear goal or outcome for your playbook, right? It's like everything has to have an objective, or else what are you doing? What are you building towards? So think about it. Anytime you're creating a playbook, and we can use the example of a renewal playbook, it's straightforward. Many of you who are managing revenue, this is going to be a familiar motion to you, but think about that, right? Your renewal playbook has a very clear objective. It's to help your team orchestrate the steps to achieve hopefully a successful renewal outcome, right? It's to help them say, here are the different things you're going to do at the different times you're going to do it to hopefully result in your customer renewing their subscription if you're in a subscription model. So it has a very clear goal. So you have to think about that. Anytime you're building a playbook, if it doesn't have a very clear objective of what it is that you're trying to achieve, you need to think about that first. That's where you have to start, because there's no sense in creating a playbook that doesn't have a goal, right? Or else you're just giving your team busy work to do. It has to have purpose. Like everything we do in customer success has to have purpose. So even as you think back to playbooks that you have in place already, let's just say you have a library of playbooks, I would actually go back and make sure that you either have a place where you've documented what the objective or the goal is, and make sure that it's clear to your team, because sometimes that's a missed element, right? You might have all those steps in it, and it may seem obvious to you as a leader, but think about who's using your playbooks. And as an end user, let's not make assumptions that they just get it, right? Like that every playbook you've ever built, and I'll tell you, I'm like the queen of playbooks. I've built like 75 unique playbooks, which is crazy. But with those, I can tell you every single one had an objective, had a purpose. So step one, make sure that you have a very clear understanding of what that success outcome or goal is for that playbook, and then make sure you're socializing that to your team. All right, point two, you've got to have criteria on who to target, when, and why. Right? So your playbooks, hopefully, again, we talked about this as a series of tasks and activities that are going to help you scale. And so when we think about that, you've got to be able to be very clear on, okay, well, if I'm the CSM, who am I working with on this playbook, right? So who am I targeting these tasks and activities to? When should I be doing this, right? So everything has a timing and sequencing, and then that why. And so we're going to continue on this theme of just using the renewal playbook because it's super easy to relate to, but the criteria and who to target, when and why. For this, my target person might be my main point of contact, right? We won't call them a champion because we don't know if they're a champion, but your main point of contact. And so that's who I might want to initiate that playbook with as my end user, because I want to start the conversation with them. Now, of course, for some of you, maybe you want to start with the executive sponsor, or there's somebody else in the partnership. Maybe it's finance, whomever it is, procurement, whoever that person is, right? You've got to outline that. So for me, we're going to start with our main point of contact because we want to initiate and broker the conversation with them. Now, the when, right? All of these things have to happen at the right time. And I always say playbooks are really there to facilitate that, making sure that your team does the right things at the right time. And so the when has to be super clear. So for us at ClientSuccess, again, sticking with the renewal playbook, we start our renewal process 120 days before the renewal date. And so that gives us ample time to have the right conversations, navigate any objections that we have, and to make sure that we're not, rushing the process, because that's what it is. It is a process, and it's a commercial one, which sometimes has a lot of layers and complexity and nuances that we've got to be delicate about. So we want to make sure that we've got the timing there. So your when has to be important too. And the when isn't always just a date in time in that journey. It could be based off of a certain triggered event, right? So your when could be when an event happens. So an executive sponsor leaves, right? So your main executive, person who signed your contract, they left, they went to another company. That event might trigger a playbook, right? Because they're gone now. And so you might want to be encouraging your team to do certain things or navigate this appropriately. And so that might be your when, right? Like when that event happens. And then the why behind those things, a little bit different than your success outcome or your goal, which is the core objective of the entire playbook. But the why you're going to be doing these things has to be clear, right? That why are we targeting this person? Why are we doing it this time? And so again, I'm big on just making sure that there's clarity around the things that we're asking our teams to do. I always like to think that when there is, the lack of clarity there, or whenever there's ambiguity, people will fill that space with their own information. And so I don't want to do that. We want to avoid anyone connecting their own dots. Like, it's very clear. Here's who we're targeting. Here's when, here's why. The third point here, so the third element of a successful playbook is going to include the list of that predetermined steps and activities, right? So these are the actions that you're going to want your CSMs or whomever on your team or whoever in your organization is going to be running this. But these are the tasks and activities that you're going to want them to take. Now, I'll tell you, I've seen playbooks that stay super high level, where maybe each playbook has, 5 tasks. I've seen others that are super comprehensive, and I probably fall more in the comprehensive bucket, but where you're outlining all of the different things that you want and need your team to be doing. And it could be, even down to like the scheduling the call, having the call, sending the follow-up, right? So you've got to figure out your style in terms of the playbooks that you feel like your team needs built out. How much do you want to spell out versus, do you want to keep it more high level and it's directional and allow them to fill in the blanks there? So really up to you. But this third element is the whole playbook, right? It's kind of funny because it's number 3, it's in the middle, but it's the most important. It's making sure that your team is very clear on like, what are the things that they're going to do, right? So now we know the who, we know the when, this is your what. Number 4, also really important, is required assets that you're going to want to supply your team with. This could include templates, scripts, decks. I'll tell you, so again, we're going to stick again with the renewal playbook, but we've got a whole process built out for how we orchestrate our renewal, down to, conversations that we're having, materials that we might provide. And so any assets that might be needed to orchestrate that event properly, we want to make sure that all of those materials are available. I think a great one in this case, think about your onboarding process. If onboarding is something that you want to create a playbook for, which is a very, very common use case, you might want to include like your tracker, your kickoff decks, maybe any other referencing material, email templates that you've already got pre-constructed, any of those things that you think are going to be helpful for the team in order to accelerate their ability to complete or act on that playbook. So I make sure that every task and activity that I have in my playbook, if there is a corresponding resource for them, I'm making that available. And we won't even talk about like where you're housing this, because it could be Excel, it could be in a CRM, it could be in a customer success management solution, but wherever you're housing and running this from, making sure that those resources live there side by side with the tasks and activities. It just makes it really easy for your team to execute, again, consistently across your team, but effectively as well. And the fifth thing here is you need to have a tracking mechanism. You need to be able to see, how is your team orchestrating? Are they running these playbooks? Where are they getting stuck? Where are they skipping? Are they managing the playbooks at all? Are they doing the tasks? They're kind of going rogue. How long is it taking a customer to advance in certain stages? So there's a ton of information that you'll want to gather to just understand the effectiveness of your playbook, but then ultimately making sure that you're getting to that outcome or that objective, right? Point one. And so if you don't have the ability to have visibility or to manage this effectively, you might not know if one is ever accomplished. And so you won't ever be able to say, this playbook works, right? This is a solid playbook. It's very effective. Or, hey, here are some areas that we should modify or, change because, the team's getting stuck, or we're missing these 3 other steps that would make it super powerful. That's where you're going to kind of have to think about that wash, rinse, repeat. So these are the 5 core elements. And like I would say, if you've got playbooks built already, go back. I know, nobody wants to go back. Go back and just make sure that you've got all of these components, because if you don't, you might be missing out on your ability to really, really hone in on the value of having these playbooks in place. So define your success outcome, or what is the goal of that playbook. Make sure that you're very clear on the who you're targeting, the when and the why. Make sure that your tasks, again, the steps, the activities, make sure that they're super clear. You don't need to prescriptively write out every single step and activity, but determine, hey, our playbooks are going to be super comprehensive and include all of those things, or they're going to be high level and directional. Either way is fine. There's no right or wrong. This is your business. These are your playbooks. Make them your own. Make sure that any resources that you can provide your team, you are. Like I said, I'm big on creating those assets. It helps them. It accelerates all of their work. They're able to do the strategic work that I hired them to do instead of the busy work that I can easily offload once or twice. And then a way to track it. So definitely make sure that you've got all these things in place. And like I said, it's the beginning of the year. It's a great time to go back and just double click to make sure all those pieces are in place. So when I think about playbooks, and anyone can categorize these any which way. And I tell you, if you've been to my boot camps before, I always say, just because this is the way I do it doesn't mean it's the way you should do it. It depends is always my notorious response for everything. But here's how I've categorized our playbooks here at ClientSuccess. Same categorization I've used previously at other organizations as well, because I found that it's helped me understand and kind of break down the different types of playbooks to make sure that we're using them the right way. So the first category that I have here created is LIFECYCLE. The second is our growth and advocacy. So again, if your team is responsible for growing your accounts or building advocates, there's a lot of different programs and playbooks that you might want to create around those. The third one is risk. Sadly, I always feel like the risk playbook category always contains the most number of playbooks, but there are a lot of risk factors that you might want to help your team navigate. And the last bucket that I created here, I actually created this a couple of years ago. It's our objective category. Now, the last few companies that I've worked on, we've been really crisp on designing what are the objectives that we're hoping or helping our customers achieve through the partnership. And so again, if you've attended any of my boot camps before, you might be familiar with the 7 objectives that we've created here at ClientSuccess, right? We've got democratizing data, scaling process. So we've got a bunch of different objectives that we like to help our customers with. And so we've got playbooks that basically help orchestrate our customers' ability to achieve those those objectives. So those are tools to really help guide my team to just make sure that we're staying focused on what it is our customers were trying to do when they came on board. So these are the 4 categories that we've created. You might have a whole bunch more. You might have different ones. You might love these and keep these, but let's unpack what each of these contains. So if it wasn't super obvious, I'm going to break down a little bit about the types of playbooks you might be able to find in these different categories. And then I'm going to give you examples. So as I mentioned, I've created so many different playbooks in my career. I'm going to show you different examples of the types, and then we'll dig into I'm going to give you 5 examples. We'll kind of break those down even more. So the first category is LIFECYCLE playbooks. Think about these as the playbooks that are going to support the standard motions across your customer journey. right? So if you know, hey, every customer we have, we're going to do a partnership kickoff. Then we have onboarding. At some point we do a core meeting, which is our customer objective review, might be similar to your EBR, QBR. We are always going to run the renewal playbook, right? We're always going to seek for advocates at a certain point. So there are certain things that we do throughout the life cycle that no matter who our customer, no matter what segment, those things will always happen. And it's just part of how we orchestrate them through our journey. And so that's how we define our lifecycle playbooks, right? So any playbook that's to facilitate the standard lifecycle of a customer at ClientSuccess will fall into our lifecycle playbook category. This second one is growth and advocacy. I really love this category. I haven't seen too many people put a ton of playbooks together to support these, but I'll share a couple with you. So this is where I think about any opportunity advocacy playbooks that are going to help the proactive, the proactive orchestration of either commercial activities or advocacy programs. So in growth and advocacy, we have certain indicators that might help us understand when a customer might be ready for upsell conversations or cross-sell. This might also help us understand when there's opportunities to talk about new products or launches or things of that nature. It could be to talk about their opportunity to participate in case studies or to be a reference, or maybe they want to be a speaker at an event or at a podcast or on a webinar. So there's different activities that you might want your customers to participate in, but you want to be able to orchestrate how you engage them in those activities in a specific way. And so this might be helpful for your team. Hey, if they're not familiar with working with a customer on doing a case study, for example, you might have a case study playbook that said, hey, if you got a customer who, if you're tracking their goals, hey, achieved all their goals, and they recently gave a promoter NPS score, might suggest to you that, hey, this customer is probably in a good position to participate in a case study. So you can determine whether or not you want to manually or automatically deploy a playbook if you're using software and run those plays. And so it'll help your team make sure that we're doing the right things at the right time, right? Going back to the whole nature of the playbooks. The next category there was the risk playbooks. Like I said, sadly, I see folks create probably the most amount of playbooks that fall into this bucket. But think about this as like those points in times that require your team to intervene or mitigate based on certain behaviors or activities, or honestly, lack thereof. So you might have a customer who's unresponsive, and you might have a series of tasks or activities that you want your team to run if your customer is just unresponsive, right? Maybe they've gone dark on you and you can't seem to get a response, but there might be a checklist of things that your leader might put together or you might put together that says, hey, don't worry, if your customer has gone dark, let's go try these 5, 6, 7 things, and hopefully that will change the engagement over time. You might have ones for your, like I mentioned earlier, executive sponsor turnover. So maybe somebody that you're working very closely with in the partnership is no longer with the organization, they've left. And so now you've got to kind of, build a new relationship at that level. Maybe you're going to work with your champion and your main point of contact to help you do that, but you've got to kind of rebuild and make sure you've got the right points and access to the right people at those different various levels. You could have received a detractor NPS score, right? Who hasn't gotten one of those before? You get like a 2, it's great. So you get this flag that might suggest, hey, if your customer is giving you some feedback, you might want to double click into that. And here's the steps that you're going to want to go take to make sure that you're having the appropriate conversations at the right time. So again, maybe breaking that down into those like different categories, you're going to have that. So for us, like I treat kind of unresponsive, so no response to a survey the same way as detractor. So whether or not my customers are giving me bad feedback or no feedback, I kind of treat that the same, but we've got playbooks for those in the risk category. So again, the risk ones, anything that signals, again, the need for your team to intervene appropriately, mitigate risk in the partnership. And the last one here is, as I mentioned, is the objective playbooks category. So for us, this is the framework that we're going to want to execute against, depending on what my customers came on board to achieve. So like I said, maybe it's to democratize data. So they want to make sure they've got one centralized single source for all customer data. We've got ways to make sure that we're doing those things, right? There's different parts of our platform that we'll need to make sure that they're using and adopting. We've got to make sure that data is being imported properly and flowing back, right? So that bidirectional sync. So we've got a series of tasks and activities that we need to do in order to ensure that our customers are achieving that objective. So we've created a couple playbooks to help support that. So that category might be a bit nuanced to us, but I think that if you're working with your customers to achieve their goals and And some things that you're going to do, depending on what their goals are standard. And no matter who the customer, if they want to get from A to Z looks like this, right? Here's the tasks and activities. Of course, there's going to be other things you might want to add or remove or modify, but generally speaking, here are the things that we're going to do. That's going to be your playbook. So that's how we've broken it down. I have found, some of you are probably unfamiliar with categorizing these things, but what I have found is that it helps me understand visibility into when I do reporting. So how many of our playbooks against each of the categories is live at any given time with our customer base, which are the ones that are being heavily adopted, when and why, right? So again, if I'm looking at this, I've got the most amount of my playbooks deployed might be risk playbooks. That's probably not great unless we're advancing through those, right, and getting out to those favorable outcomes. So from a reporting standpoint, it's really helpful. From my team standpoint, it really helps them focus and identify and find the right playbooks they might need at any appropriate time. Again, if you're not using a software to deploy playbooks, and let's just say you are using Excel, categorizing this might be a little bit easier for them to find and get access to, right? So even if you're just trying to organize them for your team, but tons of reasons why you might want to go and categorize yours. Like I said, these are our 4 categories. We've found them really helpful to just group them this way for the team. So I'm going to give you some examples. So like I said, I've created a whole bunch of playbooks in my lifetime. Maybe some of these are useful to you, maybe they're not. But again, the intention here is I'm going to show you a couple that fall into 3 of the main categories. We're going to cover life cycle, growth and advocacy, and then risk. The objective ones are really specific to ours, so I didn't think that there was a need to share those. But this is really just intended to help you guys ideate, right? Like, what are some of the things that you might want to do throughout any given category here? So a few that I have here: budget planning. This is a non-obvious one, so I want to throw this out here because this might not be something that many of you have thought of. Maybe some of you have, but if you're working with a large enterprise organization, and I know a lot of us want to say that we've got enterprise customers, but if you've ever worked with a true enterprise business, you understand the complexity of budget planning and any like procurement and legal and all of these things. So I used to have a playbook created that would allow us to make sure that we were having budget planning conversations throughout the life cycle if we hadn't had certain fields checked off. And what this basically indicated to my team was, do we know when our customer starts their budget planning? Because after they've planned their budget, if we're not in it, or we haven't gotten an opportunity to grow the partnership and get the appropriate future budget allocated, we were locked out. Right? So you were either locked into your current contract, you were locked out of it altogether, but budget planning really became a helpful one for us. So again, depending on the size of the customers that you're working with, having a playbook that would help you understand when it's appropriate time to have that conversation, and then how to manage that, that entire process is really helpful. A couple other things that we did here, like I said, we don't do EBRs or QBRs. If you've attended my sessions in the past, you know that we actually run what we call a customer objectives review meeting. It's our core meeting. So we've got a playbook for that. It's part of our life cycle, right? So there's something that's standard that will happen throughout the course of the customer journey. We did a bunch of different surveys, and then of course surveys require follow-up, because don't ask for feedback from your customers if you're not going to do something with it. So a post-sale survey follow-up. So what we used to do is, once a deal has been closed, 4 weeks into the contract, we would send a post-sale survey, and this would help us understand, did the sales team do a good job in setting the right expectations? Were you kind of prepared and know what you were walking into? Do you feel like the experience that you had hoped and you were told you would have, does that seem to be coming to reality for you? So we'd have a survey there, and then obviously based on the feedback, we would need to follow up. So this actually triggered once we received a response, and would allow us to follow up appropriately and make sure that we were closing the loop with our customers, obviously thanking them for their feedback regardless, but then making sure if there is anything we had to double click into, we were using that as an opportunity to do that. Account transitions. I will tell you, this has been like probably my #1 used playbook this past year. We've rebuilt the entire team at ClientSuccess. So as you can imagine, lots of shuffling of accounts, but account transitions are going to happen regardless, right? Even if you've got a team that stays forever, you've got people that get promoted, they grow, they move to new roles, they move into leadership. At some point in time, you're going to have to move an account from one person to another. And how you orchestrate that is really critical. Again, I think our last bootcamp series, we covered account transitions and how to do that flawlessly. So basically, you want to make sure that we have a playbook in place for that. if we needed to move an account, we triggered off this playbook and it told my team what to do, how to do it, when to do it. And it made sure that we tried to remove as much friction as possible for the customer, because at the end of the day, that was what was most important to us, is creating a frictionless experience for them, one where we had continuity in the partnership and that knowledge flow as well. So had a really great playbook for that. New context. I'm not going to read off all of these. You can obviously screenshot my slide here, or the deck will be made available for you when we share the recording. But again, this is to help you see that there are different types of playbooks. Again, these are not all the ones that I've created, but I think it's important to just start to think creatively about what are the things that you're going to need your team to always do, right? What are the things that are those repeatable tasks and activities? Those are things that you can very easily create into playbooks. And so you want to just make sure that, again, you're thinking through those things and you're creating appropriate playbooks there to help with that. Again, these are some of the ones that I've created in that life cycle category. Definitely not all, but definitely a handful to help you. The next thing here is risk playbooks. So again, some of these are probably going to be very obvious, sadly, probably some that you're probably more familiar with than others, but customer starts to indicate that there's budget constraints. We might have a way that we want to manage and kind of orchestrate different tasks and activities when we start talking about budget, right? Because that obviously means that they're not seeing the value that they need to from the partnership. So you're probably going to need to do a lot more work than just renegotiate the contract, right? That you don't want to always go to the motion of just reduce the cost. Moving backwards in contracts is not always helpful, but making sure that you're educating your customers on the value and preserving as much of that revenue as possible is really helpful. So if your customer starts expressing concerns around budgets, perhaps there's lack of product adoption, right? You're noticing that your customer is not adopting your product as they should. And so those might be indicators that we need to do further training, enablement. Maybe there's a product feature that is prohibitive or it's a blocker for them. So understanding what is causing that, this will give you a series of tasks and activities you're going to run if your customer is not adopting the product as they should. Inadequate license consumption. If you sell on a per license basis and your customers are only using one of, let's say, 100 licenses, that might be a little tricky. So you want to make sure that you're thinking through that, because that could also result in downsell or churn in the future, right? Oh, well, our team's not really using it, or you know what, only one person's using it, so we'll let them keep a license, but these other 100 we're going to get rid of. So understanding that that is a risk indicator and making sure that you've got a series of tasks and activities for your team. What do you do when your customers are not using their licenses, right? I'm sure if some of you are in a license model, you've gotten to a point where your customer is saying like, oh, you know what? Yeah, let's go. We're going to buy 100 because we're planning to hire a bunch of people. Makes a ton of sense. Guess what? Those hires never happen because there's a global pandemic, and all of a sudden, all of those unused licenses have to go away. You've got to account for that. So making sure that you're managing that effectively. Then there's things like, onboarding, right? I know that we're all trying to get fast time to value. Maybe it's your onboarding is taking too long. Could be 100 days, could be 500 days. I don't know how long your onboarding lasts, but depending on what that looks like, you're going to find an acceptable amount of time. And then once it exceeds that, maybe there is a playbook that you want to deploy there also. Technical support risk, right? Lots of tickets. Not the tickets are bad, but maybe they're not being managed effectively. They're not being closed out. Sometimes you have to go and dissect what's happening in those tickets. Maybe, again, more training enablements required, but there could be something there. Poor fit customer, nobody's ever had one of those. But passive detractor NPS scores, no response NPS. I told you, like, I'm a big fan of getting feedback, good, bad, or otherwise. And so no feedback is usually not a great sign. Maybe it's competitive, right? I know that we are in a very competitive market, which is okay, but understanding how to navigate a competitive situation if your customer is looking at an alternative solution. There's also, build versus buy as another alternative where maybe it's not competitive, but it's, hey, you know what, we decided we're going to do this in Excel, or we're going to go build the product because we've got the world's best engineers and product designers. So figuring out how to manage and mitigate that, and then also depending on what competitor you're looking at. So I've actually built out different competitive playbooks based on who they were looking at. So I feel like I've always been in a very competitive landscape in all my roles, but one company I was at was very competitive, and we probably had 5 competitors that we ran at and faced the most. And so we actually had specific playbooks that we would run depending on who the competitor was, because there was different things that we'd have to negotiate. So just making sure that you're giving your team, again, visibility into what to do, how to do it, when to do it. Payment delinquency, if your customers aren't paying, that's probably not a great sign. How do you manage that? This could be something that you're working with finance on, but again, playbooks can help give visibility to your team. So even if they are triggered and deployed for your team, maybe they're not the ones running or managing those tasks and activities, or maybe they're working in conjunction with other teams. Poor engagement, loss of power user champion. Maybe, there's M&A. That's a big one. State of the business isn't doing well, right? Again, global pandemic, we just navigated. Not every company made it through favorably. So these are all different types of risks that you might be faced with in the course of your partnerships with your customers. Again, this is not the only list, but it hopefully, again, will help you start to ideate about the different situations you might find yourself in. I worked at a company previously. They had hardware devices. And so it was hardware and software. And the minute we actually started to see hardware being disconnected, it was likely that they were going to end up leaving because they were installing new hardware. So we actually had data coming in that showed us when hardware was being disconnected. And so we had less reporting units. That actually became a risk indicator because they were likely moving to another solution. So different ways to find out, what are the signals you and your organization need to be paying attention to? It could be these plus, it could be something completely different, but regardless, you just want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what risk looks like to your customers and that you're building the playbooks for your team. And then, so to give you some ideas around some growth and advocacy playbooks, maybe, like I said, promoter NPS, end user license expansion, case study. So maybe they want to participate in a case study. There's a speaking engagement. They want to be a reference. So there could be a ton of different things that you want your customers to do when one of these pops up as an opportunity. So making sure that your team understands how to manage it. What are the things to run, how to run it? What is the timing and sequencing of that? Just because a playbook deploys doesn't mean you go and do those 10 things today. Sometimes there's a sequencing to this as well. Maybe it's you're doing one thing, you wait a month, you're doing another thing, you wait a month. So depending on the playbook, right, there's again, when I talked about the who and the when, those are important, and it's important to understand and specify the when between tasks and activities in these playbooks as well. So again, just some ways to give you some ideas. I will walk you through a handful. I am watching the clock. I know that we're at 38, but you know me, I'll just speed up and talk a little bit faster, and you guys can slow down if you're listening to the recording. So I'm going to give you top 5 playbooks. Again, this is just in my opinion. It depends on your business, your company, your customers. So take it for what it's worth. I'm going to give you 5 examples. I'm going to show you some of the steps and tasks and activities. So again, I am very detailed in my playbooks. So even the ones I use are a little bit more comprehensive than the ones I'm going to show you, but this should help you, again, just get started on thinking about what are the types of things you might want to include in your playbooks. So we'll start with this one, partnership kickoff. Again, if you attended my boot camps in the past, you know that I do a partnership kickoff, which is different than an onboarding kickoff. I start with a partnership kickoff, we then move to onboarding. So it just really helps us align again on the partnership. So there are a series of tasks and activities that I ask the team to follow when we're doing this. Again, this is not our comprehensive list, but again, directionally help you get some ideas here. So we've got, these steps outlined for our customers. We want to make sure that we're sending the email once the AE has introduced us. So again, we do this immediately following a deal being closed. We schedule an internal handoff with our sales and onboarding teams. We schedule the partnership kickoff meeting with the customer and the account team. We make sure that we're spending time reviewing the contract and any of the notes in Salesforce. So this could be HubSpot or any CRM or tracking system. We make sure that we're preparing our kickoff materials. In this case, the deck. So we would also have the deck template available in the playbook. We schedule a deck review meeting because we definitely want more eyes on that to make sure that we're all walking into the same conversation. Everyone is aware of the roles they're playing in the discussion. Then we host a kickoff meeting with the customer and the account team. We follow up with the customer. We share the deck and the success plan, and then we schedule onboarding kickoff meetings. So again, not every single task and activity, but hopefully the ability to give you something to build off of. But this is what we're thinking through when we have our playbooks. Now, what I didn't include here is the who and the when, because sequencing is unique to every organization. You guys might move really quick, right? This might be, hey, you know what? We do these 4 things on day 1, and day 2, we do these 3 things. And then by day 4, we're done and we've kicked off with the customer. Other organizations, it might take you a little bit longer, right? And that could be very specific reasons why. So I didn't share my sequencing because, again, it is personal to your organization. I didn't want to start to give anybody any ideas of what it should look like, right? I want you guys to think about what is appropriate for your customers and build off of that. The next playbook that I'll share with you is, oh, sorry, guys, I'm like, there we go, onboarding. So the second one is onboarding. So I know that most of us probably all believe and understand the value of onboarding and making sure that you get that right. So a couple of things that we've included in a playbook here, making sure that we're scheduling the onboarding kickoff with the customer and all relevant stakeholders, preparing their materials. So in this case, their materials could be their tracker. It could be, you know, a project management board. It could be a Trello board, whatever you're using to track onboarding alongside of your customers, making sure that you're sharing that, sending over any documentation to begin that process, hosting the onboarding kickoff, establishing the cadence and making sure that expectations are set for each session, and then memorializing the discussion. I'm very big on memorialization of every conversation you have with the customer. Send the follow-up, send it in writing, make sure it's detailed and includes everything you've agreed on together. It's a great reference for anybody who wasn't able to join the call or just even being able to go back in time and reference it together. But making sure that, again, you're kicking off effectively. Now, again, your onboarding might be super comprehensive. It might include 100 steps, and that's super okay. For this, again, this is high level, just to give you, again, something to ideate off of. A business review. As I mentioned, we don't do business reviews. We do these core meetings, but very similar framework. As long as you're meeting with your customers periodically to assess value, I think it doesn't matter what you call it. Doesn't matter how you orchestrate it. As matters the outcome of that conversation. So in this case, you might want to reach out to your business sponsor and schedule that EVR, review, you know, your notes. It could be, you know, NPS, open cases, program project statuses, anything. Build your deck with an emphasis on the value goals and project status. Circulate your presentation internally for review, including management. Meet with the customer champion to align the messaging. I'm big on that, like making sure that your main point of contact has seen the presentation before you're going into it. Nobody's blindsided. Hopefully you'll get them to participate in the storytelling as well, considering that they're doing and probably owning much of the work themselves. Hosting that meeting with your customer, logging it, and then meeting summary next steps. So again, making sure that you're doing all those things to have the appropriate conversation. Next one here is your poor health score. So this could be, I'm using health score, but this could be like really, you know, plug in any risk that you think is relevant. But I'm using poor health score because if you've constructed a good health mechanism to track your customer's health, it should be helpful directionally to address risk. So we're going to use this and say your customer's health score has dropped. And so you've got a poor health score. And now what do we do? So in this case, you want to review the data to understand the risk signals and behaviors associated with the score. Reach out to the customer to schedule the discussion, better understand the situation, prepare for the discussion. So build slides to highlight data and insights, prepare recommendations, design a plan with your customer to get things back on track, send a follow-up email with a plan detailed and ask for confirmation from your customer, right? So you want them to confirm, yes, this plan looks good. We're agreed. We all know what we have to do. Create the plan in your system of record for tracking and managing it over time, and then monitor the improvement, right? So again, giving you some ideas of how to think about this and how to manage this with your customers as you're navigating these situations. All right, and then the last one I'll give you here is renewal. So again, if you're tracking or if you're managing retention, having a renewal playbook would be super helpful. Again, it just makes sure that your team is doing the right things at the right time with the right folks. So a sample playbook here would include, you know, reviewing the customer's data before you go into the renewal conversation, right? How is your customer doing? Are they using your product? How often are they engaging with you? What does the relationship look like? Hopefully you've got a way to track that. Are they seeing value and ROI from the partnership? So what does that success look like? Check for things like, or manage auto renewals, right? So maybe there's an out clause. Is there an auto renewal? So some unique contract language. There could be something unique in there. So again, understanding how customer or flexible your contracts might be. I always just tell my team, hey, go and check these things to make sure that we're good. If there's an auto renewal, obviously we've got to be very cognizant about communicating that early to our customers. We don't want anyone blindsided by anything. We don't try to lock people into a contract that they don't want to be in. Obviously, if there is an auto renewal, we do like to communicate that well in advance. So we've got that as part of our process. We meet with the customer to discuss it. And so we follow MedPIC as our kind of commercial discussion framework. So if you're not familiar with MedPIC, I do think that we covered it in one of our other boot camps as well, but you can go Google that. Review and address any areas of risk. So obviously, if there are situations or objections that have come up, preventing your customers from really agreeing to move forward with the partnership, managing those effectively. It could require you to fire off a risk playbook, right? So maybe something happened there. Maybe they're going through a merger or acquisition and they're just now telling you about this. So maybe you want to go fire the M&A playbook. You want to make sure that you're contacting your business sponsor to confirm the renewal, the review details, and make sure that you have a good handle on the process. What does that look like? For some companies, you're going to have to go through legal and procurement and some review process, security, vetting, things like that. Other organizations is pretty straightforward. Maybe your main point of contact just signs and that's it. You're done. Easy peasy. So it really does depend. But if you know that there is a chance there could be a comprehensive process, making sure that you're documenting that as well. Sending your renewal paperwork out, obviously someone's got to execute something, and then hopefully closing out all of your processes and your books to just make sure that everything's up to date. So this, again, sample renewal playbook. Again, all these are just to give you something to ideate off of. You've got to create your playbook specific to your customers, your company, your product, and your process. So please, don't just copy and paste these and try to make them yours. You will get something wrong. I promise you, you will trip up somewhere. Please think about your organization and what it is that you need to do with your customers. These are to help guide you and give you some ideas of where to start. But hopefully those 5 playbooks were helpful for you. So let's go ahead, and I am watching the clock, 47. All right, driving playbook adoption. So I'll kind of leave you with this. I think, folks will go ahead and create playbooks. I do all the time. I love them. I think they're super helpful, but it is no good to anyone if I create a playbook and no one on my team is using it. Right. So you've got to make sure that you are rolling this out effectively with your team. And you've got to make sure that they're adopting it and using it. So I'm going to give you my 5-step process to making sure that playbooks are being adopted effectively. First, educate the team. People are okay with change if you give them the why behind it and they understand the value of what it is that you're doing. So I'm big on just educating the team. So make sure that they understand the value of the playbook, what they're going to get out of it, how it's going to benefit them, support them right in their day-to-day. So making sure you start with education. Right? Enable your team. How are we doing? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Then you got to roll it out, right? You got to train your team on when to use this playbook. Make sure they understand how to access it, manage it, set proper expectations with them on what you expect them to do with the playbook once they've had to deploy it. The third thing here is tracking adoption. You've got to have a way to get visibility into this. I talked about it earlier. You've got to be able to manage it and monitor it. So make sure that you have a way to track the usage of it. You understand, where they're getting stuck or skipping steps that I mentioned earlier. Then the next part about having a really good adoption program here is collect feedback from your team. Just because you're the leader and you think that these 10 things need to happen, guess what? Maybe those 10 things don't work well. Maybe the sequencing is off. Maybe you missed 3 steps. Maybe you have 3 steps too many. Go talk to your team about what's working and what's not, and get them to lean in and help you modify it. Right? Their feedback is super important, right? You create playbooks as a leader to help your team do the work they need to do easier and faster. If your playbooks are slowing them down or preventing them from those 2 objectives, then they're wrong, right? They're not serving the purpose that they're intended to do. So please go meet with your team, collect that feedback, and make sure that you're doing step 5, which is modifying your playbooks. So just like anything that you build out, any process, right? You have to revisit it. It is not a set it and forget it. Just because you built a playbook 3 years ago for something doesn't mean that playbook is still relevant today. Guess what? If I thought about that way with my competitive playbooks that I built, which I shared with you guys, right? I had a whole bunch of competitors. We had competitor playbooks per each one. Guess what? Half those competitors didn't even end up making it into year 2, 3, right? Like they went away, something happened, they were acquired. I can't leave those playbooks live. Modify your playbooks, go revisit them, make changes, tweak them, make them better, optimize them. Maybe your process changes. You've deployed different technologies. So maybe the things you have to do and where they have to do it has to change. So think about that. Pull your team in. People want to feel like change is happening with them, not to them. So pull your teams in and make them a part of the process. All right, I'm gonna give you quick playbook operations. I've got 10 minutes left. We will get to some Q&A. So I do wanted to say, like I mentioned earlier, I don't ever really sit here and tout ClientSuccess. You see that, you know that. But I will tell you, we are using ClientSuccess to power our playbooks. And so what we call them is success cycles. And so these are the cycles that we run based on different activities, tasks, triggered events data. And so this is a sample of us building this out. So like I mentioned earlier, if you've got playbooks, it doesn't matter what tool or where you're storing them, you have to make sure that they include all the different steps, tasks, and activities. If you actually look here, I know it's very light, but you see little numbers in parentheses next to these bold statements. If you actually click on this little arrow here, it actually gives you more tasks and activities. So if you look here, this one, which has 2 activities, actually has a few tasks associated with it. So 2 tasks here, 2 tasks here, another 2 here, 1, 2, 3. So if you start to add those all up, look, 3, 5, 5, you can understand once you expand all of these, my playbook becomes very comprehensive because I do account for every single step, task, and activity, just to make sure that my team knows what to do, where to do it, where to access information. It has all of our tools and templates built right in. Again, scale and ease of use makes it really easy for them. I'm big on visibility. And so our playbook, the way that we track them, allows us to see, you know, where are we? This is an individual customer using this playbook. So I get to see what stage are they on. In this case, maybe they completed these 2 stages. So we're into that 3rd stage. And then I've got 5 tasks there I've got to manage through. So I've got lots of visibility, which help me understand how my customers are progressing through certain things. At an individual level, I can see, great, you know, how far are we completed? We're 20% complete. Again, are we overdue? How many days into the stage? What are the things that we've got up next? What are those due dates? Poor Dave over here, he's not getting his job done. He's not here to defend himself either. But our platform gives us a lot of visibility around this. So again, it doesn't need to be client success, but having this type of visibility around how your team is using them, but then also how they're deployed against your customers and how your customers are benefiting from the output of the work that you're doing. And then being able to report on this, we also have a comprehensive view that allows us to see roll up. So how many of my customers are deployed for any particular success cycle, and then what stages they're in. So I always get the ability to see, okay, well, where are my customers in these different playbooks? And we've got playbooks to support customer journeys as well. So super cool, gives us a ton of visibility, makes it really easy for us to manage against our customers against what we're doing. And so I just think, you know, you have to decide how you want to structure your playbooks. I've seen folks, you know, spell everything out, and it makes it super helpful. You know, they've got varying degrees of experience across their team. Other folks, it's, you know, want to keep them high level, and that's cool too. It doesn't matter what you do if it's the right thing for your team, is what I will say there. So I will stop sharing right now. I'm going to pull up our Q&A, and I saw the chat just going crazy here. So hopefully you guys were all having some really great conversation. I know that I have not been able to keep up with any of the chatter in there, but hopefully there's been some good discussion. So what I'm going to do here is I've got a few questions here, so I'm going to try to get through as many as possible. So first one up, Jenny Washington. So she said she would love to see the list of my 75 playbooks. Well, I gave you a sneak peek into quite a few of those in the screenshots that I included there. This deck will be included, so you'll have access to the 5 that I gave you. If there are playbooks that you have questions about, or you're trying to create, you want to talk through them, happy to do that. We'll probably be sharing a couple additional playbooks as the follow-up, as a template. So we might give you 10 sample playbooks just to build off of as part of a template. So that's hopefully, Jenny, that's helpful to you there. All right, so Jenny also asked, is there any adjustment on the start of the renewal playbook to take into consideration their launch date? Yeah, so I mean, the triggers for your playbooks, it really depends on, again, if you're using a platform to support this, you might use their start date, their contract start date. It might be you start like when they go live, because that might have some, you know, factoring in, depending, like I know some companies, they're, you know, to get a platform deployed might take a year, and they might have a multi-year contract. And so all those different factors play into when they start these conversations, when it's appropriate to start them. So I think, again, I give you my notorious response. It depends. All of these things that we've talked through today are so specific to your customers, to your product, to your company, that you really do have to tailor it and make it yours. But yeah, you can definitely, you know, adjust dates. Again, the 120 on the renewal playbook is for us. It's how I like to run it. But listen, if you've got a pretty straightforward process there, maybe it's 30 days, maybe it's 60 days, maybe it's 90, it doesn't matter, right? It's up to you and what you need in order to effectively manage the process to drive that outcome. So it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you've got the tools there and the steps to achieve those goals. Cheryl had asked, regarding including assets, is it acceptable to provide links within the playbook including templates and things versus including the how to perform steps within the playbook itself. So I think I do a combination of both. So I tell my team like what to do, but I also do include templates because, for example, I don't need my team wasting hours building a deck. So all the decks that my team uses, I pre-build for them as templates that they can easily go in and treat like a buffet, right? Here are the slides. Here's every slide you might need possible to facilitate this conversation. Pick and choose the ones that you think are going to be appropriate given the customer, modify them as you need. So I'm big on giving them those templates. So there is a little bit of like lead the horse to water, and then maybe I do push their head down and make them drink a little bit. It really depends, but I'm just trying to facilitate speed. And I do want my team to be doing more strategic work and less administrative work. Sometimes not providing templates requires them to do more busy work, if that makes sense. So hopefully I've answered that, Cheryl. Let's see. Ashley had asked, I struggle with the kickoff, introducing success goals. I'm curious, how do you help customers choose their objectives? I'm excited about this in next week's webinar. Well, great, Ashley. Hopefully we'll tackle this next week. But you know, we introduced goals actually in the sales process, and then it's one of the things that we also include in our new customer survey that goes out. So we're really talking about these same core 7 objectives from sales throughout kickoff. And so our customers are very familiar that is the framework that we use. And we try to make sure that we're introducing it in a way that definitely aligns to the real whys anyone bought our platform. So I think for them, it's obvious. And so having that conversation is pretty, I wouldn't say it's easy, but I think we're all aligned in like the why we're trying to have this conversation. The 7 objectives make sense for them. And then to help them, you know, it does, you know, sometimes facilitate, it does need us to facilitate a deeper conversation around like what it is they're trying to achieve and kind of unpack that with them a bit to get to those KPIs. But usually it's not a difficult conversation because we all know that there are reasons why people buy software. We just want to help them document it and we want to track it with them. So not difficult, just making sure it's a part of that conversation. All right, let's see. We had an anonymous person ask, how do playbooks and customer success plans go together? What if your company doesn't have either of these things in play? So I think about playbooks as our internal orchestration of like, these are the things that we want our teams to do. Success plans can work in partnership with, but the way I think about success plans are, these are the tasks and activities that you and your customer are going to work on together to achieve their outcome. So it's a little bit different. It might, I would say our objective playbooks probably can substitute a success plan for customers who are a little less familiar about what they have to do and why they have to do it or when they have to do it, things like that. So in the spirit of kind of populating a success plan for our customers, our objective playbooks probably help there a little bit. We can build off of them together. But I would say they're just different in terms of the objectives, like your playbooks, again, probably more internally what your team is supposed to do. Your success plans with your customers are going to be, what do we have to do together to achieve the outcome that you want to? But again, all these things can be working in partnership together. And depending on the level of transparency your organization has with their customers, maybe you're even sharing some of the playbooks or at least giving insight into that. So for example, when we reach out to customers because if there's a poor health score, right? We're very transparent about why we're reaching out, right? We noticed that you've not been using the platform a lot. We've noticed that engagement is a bit lower than normal. You know, your last feedback was, you know, unfavorable. So we just kind of want to understand what's going on here, right? So we basically have unpacked the reasons, but the trigger there being that unhealthy health score was the impetus of us reaching out. And so having an organic conversation about the why behind it for us always, I think, facilitates a really good, honest conversation with our customers. So I think it depends. But if you don't have either of those things in place, I would say start small. I would say start with, you know, figure out that the 2 or 3 repeatable processes that your organization will always have to do to support your customers. It could be onboarding, it could be a business review, and it could be renewal, right? As straightforward as those 3 things. Have a playbook for those. It just helps to facilitate, to make sure that your team is doing the right things at the right time. Ease of use, speed, those things. So start small if you don't have them. Introduce the concept. If you're not in a leadership position, broker the conversation with a leader or somebody in your organization, or if you have autonomy to go and do it yourself, pick 3 and run with it. Do you have playbooks by customer segment? Yes. And this one I can answer pretty quickly because I know that we are out of time. Yes. Not every customer segment has access to the same playbooks or the same types of playbooks. So I've created same type of playbook. Let's say it's the renewal playbook. The renewal playbook might look very different for all of my different segments, depending on how we're orchestrating them in partnership with our customers. So I do believe modify them accordingly. You're not going to have a super comprehensive like business review process in a lower engagement model with a customer, right? Where there's high volume customers. So you might either not have that playbook together. It's not a required motion at all in the journey, or you have a hyper modified one that just lets you hone in a couple tasks and activities so you can do that at scale. So I definitely am supportive of different playbooks for different segments and modifying as needed. So I know that we're at time. I know that we didn't get to all of them. There are so many great questions in here. I'll try to see if I can answer a couple of these maybe on LinkedIn, where I'll just pull these together and I'll kind of just do a Q&A post maybe, and hopefully get to a few more of these. I loved the engagement today. So I want to just thank you all again for joining us. Hopefully you found this conversation valuable. Hopefully you'll tell your friends. They'll join us next week as we dig into customer goals, how to set those, manage, measure, track over time, so we can all achieve success together. But again, thank you guys so much for giving me some time this week. Happy New Year. Welcome back to work if you're just getting back. And I look forward to connecting with you all again next week. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and we'll talk again soon.